The moment began with a command flung across the boardroom as if it were part of the daily air. The man at the head of the table did not look up from his folder when he called me the intern. His tone carried the confidence of someone certain about his place in the world. The others shifted in their chairs, pretending not to notice the sting in the room. I felt none of the shock they expected. I had lived long enough to recognize patterns of casual dismissal disguised as routine. I carried the coffee to him with steady hands. The cup was warm, but the moment was cold. Age teaches you that power reveals itself in tiny gestures long before it speaks in formal terms. A few people smiled nervously, aligning themselves with whichever side appeared safest. I placed the cup on the table gently, watching him assume the gesture meant acceptance. He had no idea his assumption was the first step toward his undoing. I said nothing. I offered no correction and no explanation. Silence became my shield and my strategy. It allowed him to believe he understood me, and that belief became the opening I needed. The boardroom quieted as I remained standing for a heartbeat. I wanted them to feel the shift even if they could not name it. When I moved back, I carried with me a clarity he never sensed. The meeting had begun. He pointed to the back row with the ease of someone assigning roles, confident that no one would question him. The instruction was simple, but the intention behind it was layered. He wanted distance. Not for practical reasons, but to place me where he believed I belonged, away from influence and away from notice. People like him rely on physical placement to reinforce unspoken rules. They assume that anyone seated at the edge of the room will remain at the edge of decisions. I walked toward the back slowly, observing the faces around the table. Some avoided eye contact. Others glanced at me with quiet sympathy, the kind given to someone they think has accepted defeat. Those reactions said more about the culture of the room than his words ever could. Years in corporate spaces teach you to read the energy long before you read the agenda. Leadership often reveals itself through how it treats the people it underestimates. As I reached the last row, I paused. Not out of hesitation, but to study the space he had chosen for me. It was a position designed to shrink presence and silence contribution. What he did not understand was that age changes the way you experience humiliation. It no longer pierces. It instructs. I had spent a lifetime watching strategies crumble under the weight of their own arrogance. When I finally sat, it was not in retreat. It was preparation. I could see the entire room from where he had placed me, including the blind spots he had created for himself. I felt the familiar rush of pride urging me to stand and leave the room. It would have been easy to walk out and let the moment collapse behind me. Many people mistake departure for strength, but age teaches a different lesson. Real power is not in the dramatic exit. It is in the decision to stay when someone expects you to disappear. Remaining in that chair forced him to confront something he could not control, and that alone shifted the balance in the room. As the meeting continued, I watched the board members settle into their routines. Papers rustled, pens tapped, and confident voices filled the space. No one expected me to stay engaged after being dismissed so openly. That assumption worked in my favor. While he believed he had reduced me to a spectator, I was quietly studying the room, mapping alliances, and noticing who deferred to him out of habit rather than conviction. These observations were far more valuable than any prideful reaction could have offered. Older professionals understand the discipline required to stay present when dignity feels threatened. There is a moment in life when you realize that impulse is a luxury, but strategy is a survival skill. Walking out might have satisfied the part of me that bristled at disrespect, but staying served the part of me that understood timing. Power does not rush or shout. It observes. It waits for the opening created by someone else's confidence. Remaining in that room allowed me to see the path forming, one he could not see at all. When I rose from my seat, I did it slowly enough for the room to notice. I was not making a statement, yet something in the movement unsettled him. He reacted before I even spoke. His voice lifted sharply as he told me to sit down, the kind of command used on someone expected to obey without thought. The volume was not a sign of strength. It revealed his fear of losing control in front of the very people whose approval he depended on. I remained standing for a brief moment, letting the silence stretch just enough for everyone to feel the tension. I was not challenging him. I was simply refusing to rush, and that alone disrupted the rhythm he controlled so confidently. Experience teaches you that authority is fragile when it relies on theatrics. The louder he became, the more obvious it was that his certainty was cracking. I finally lowered myself back into the chair, but not with the hurried compliance he expected. The room felt different as I did. Board members exchanged quick glances, sensing the shift. His attempt to reassert dominance had exposed how unstable his position truly was. I kept my expression neutral, observing quietly while he stumbled to regain composure. He believed he had silenced me. In reality, he had revealed how deeply threatened he was by a calm presence he could not intimidate. Rising had not been an act of rebellion. It was a reminder that power does not always stand at the head of the table. Sometimes it sits quietly, waiting for the right moment to reorder the room. I waited until the room settled again, until his voice no longer echoed and the board members had returned their eyes to their documents. When I finally spoke, it was not with emotion. It was with precision. I delivered one clear sentence that did not need force to carry weight. I would like to call this shareholder meeting to order. The words moved through the room quietly, yet they struck harder than any confrontation. Conversations stopped mid-breath. Pens froze above notepads. Even he paused, unsure whether he had heard correctly. I did not elaborate. I did not justify. Procedure does not ask permission. It simply exists. Years of experience had taught me the power of speaking only when the rules are already on your side. While he relied on tone and volume, I relied on the governing documents he had never bothered to read. The board members knew what those words meant. They understood that once spoken, they activated obligations far beyond personal authority. He attempted to laugh it off, but the reaction in the room told him the moment had changed. Several members straightened in their seats. Others searched their folders, suddenly aware that the agenda he thought he controlled was no longer his to command. Calendars, bylaws, and ownership structures operate independently of ego. They move according to signatures, not tempers. I remained still, allowing them to absorb what had shifted. He had spent years performing leadership. I had spent years understanding how leadership is documented. And in that moment, the documented version won. I opened the binder slowly, giving the board enough time to understand that formality had replaced the confusion of moments earlier. When I announced the first agenda item, I did so with a calm tone that allowed the words to settle without urgency. There was no mention of his name, no criticism, no dramatic reveal. Only the wording already approved in the company records. The simplicity was intentional. Processes carry a weight that emotion cannot imitate. I slid the relevant documents across the table, each page marked clearly with dates, signatures, and decisions he never expected anyone to revisit. As the papers reached each member, their expressions shifted. Some brows tightened. Others leaned forward, rereading lines they had overlooked for years. Not a single voice interrupted. The material spoke for itself, outlining discrepancies that required review under the rules he had ignored. He attempted to interject, but the chair beside him raised a hand softly, signaling that the procedure must continue. That small gesture revealed everything. The room was no longer guided by his reactions. It was guided by policy. He sank back slightly, realizing that defending himself emotionally would only emphasize his lack of understanding. As the board absorbed the information, eyes lowered to avoid meeting his. It was not hostility. It was recognition. The room recalculated its loyalties based on facts rather than personality. What began as a quiet agenda item became the first undeniable indication that authority had shifted. And I had not needed a single accusation to make it happen. The room settled into a silence that felt heavier than any argument. The documents lay open before the board, each line forming a clear picture of decisions that could no longer be ignored. No one raised their voice. No one rushed to defend him. Silence became the language of consequence, and in that quiet, everyone understood the direction the meeting was now taking. He shifted in his chair, waiting for someone to speak on his behalf, but the support he relied on had evaporated into stillness. When the chair finally called for the vote, the room moved with a calm certainty. There was no debate, no emotional pleas. Just a series of measured responses, each one marking the end of assumptions he believed were permanent. The process was almost gentle, yet its impact was absolute. He watched the hands rise around the table, realizing that the power he had used so carelessly had never truly belonged to him. It belonged to the structure he overlooked. The decision was recorded with formal simplicity. No one looked at him as the outcome was announced. There was nothing left to say. He was not defeated by anger or confrontation. He was undone by the very system he thought he controlled. Procedure carried out its work quietly, proving that institutions respond to order, not personality. As the meeting continued, the silence remained. It was not uncomfortable. It was conclusive. His career ended not with a dramatic scene, but with a recognition that rules, once activated, move without emotion. And in that stillness, his authority faded for good. I walked out of that room with no celebration and no satisfaction, only a quiet recognition of how easily experience can be misread. Many people carry decades of knowledge but are spoken to as if they have just arrived. I have learned that being underestimated is not a reflection of ability. It is a reflection of someone else's limited perspective. For years, I watched capable professionals get reduced to titles that did not match their worth, and I carried that memory with me into every meeting that followed. To anyone who has been dismissed or spoken to as if their presence is optional, I want you to understand what that day taught me. Being called an intern did not shrink me. Being sent to the back did not erase the years I had earned. Those labels only mattered to those who depended on them. They were never the measure of my influence or my understanding. Experience is not loud, but it is steady, and it survives the noise of people who believe position is the same as wisdom. There will always be rooms where you are underestimated. What matters is not how they define you, but whether you recognize the moments when the rules shift in your favor. Standing up is not always the declaration. Knowing when you are permitted to call the meeting is. That knowledge changes everything. And once you hold it, no one can reduce you again.